Have you ever wondered how a saint kept a group of energetic boys out of trouble and full of faith? Well, St. John Bosco might have some tips for you, so stay tuned to find out. The Miracles and Prophecies of St. John Bosco, a project of America Needs Fatima. I'm your host, Adrian Fonseca. Subscribe for new episodes every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Today, we are diving into a captivating story of how St. John Bosco creatively kept his boys busy and out of mischief during the summer months. Our story involves a memorable summer outing that Don Bosco orchestrated every year for boys who didn't go home for summer vacation. He believed in keeping boys constantly occupied with wholesome activities. This not only kept them out of trouble, but also nourished their faith and character. His summer outings at Becky, where he was born, were legendary and highly anticipated by the boys. Here are a few key takeaways to keep in mind as you watch the video. One might be the importance of keeping youth engaged in positive activities. Another might be the role of good company in human development. And maybe one more, the impact of rewarding good conduct and behavior. And here's a question for you. How can we apply Don Bosco's methods to engage and inspire the youth today? And if you support our work, consider becoming a monthly donor so we never stop having to make videos on St. John Bosco. The details are in the description box down below, but now let's get into our story. This episode relates a memorable summer outing that St. John Bosco orchestrated every single summer, especially for those boys who did not go home for summer vacation. Toward the end of September, for the Feast of Our Lady of the Rosary, Don Bosco took his students to Becky, which was the town where he was born. The trip also had the purpose of rewarding those boys whose conduct had been outstanding. In addition to this excursion, there was an added attraction at the oratory, a brass band. Don Bosco had organized it among the artisans because he considered it another highly effective way of keeping them out of mischief. He used to say, boys should be kept constantly occupied. After they finish their school or shop duties, we should entice them to join the choir, the band, or the altar boys society. This will keep them busy. If we do not give them something to think about, their minds will turn to unwholesome thoughts. The outing to Becky was the main thought that fired the boys' imagination, and it also induced many to cut short their vacations at home. Throughout the month of September, there was much talk about this adventure and a great deal of speculation as to who would be chosen to go and what villages would be visited along the way. Through many animated discussions, the boys had a foretaste of the fun that they would have in the verdant hills of Italy. They became particularly excited talking about the celebrations of the local patron saints and their feast days, as well as the harvesting of the grapes, reminiscing about the fun enjoyed during the previous summer by those who had gone there only served to heighten the boys' expectations. Those who had no hope of being among the lucky ones resolved to try harder to deserve that treat the following summer. Meanwhile, the necessary preparations were getting underway. Usually, Don Bosco and a few boys left for Becky in the second half of September at about 8 in the morning. Preference was given to those who needed this diversion the most, such as orphans or those in poor health. Since Don Bosco could not afford the coach fare, they generally walked, their route taking them through Chieri, Riva. Becky was a long distance away, but the boys did not mind because Don Bosco would pass the time by telling stories about Italian or church history, making the trip seem shorter than it actually was. When they drew near to Chieri, a town well known for its Gothic-style cathedral, several of Don Bosco's closest friends, who had been previously notified, would meet him at the outskirts of the town and invite him and his young friends to join them for lunch. After a few hours' rest, they would all set out again for Miraculous, where his brother, Joseph, was waiting. The following day, Don Bosco showed the boys the humble home where he had been born, exclaiming, "Behold the feudal estate of Don Bosco." At Becky, the boys were always greatly edified to see the people flock to the novena services conducted by Don Bosco. Since the little chapel could not accommodate them all, a great many had to stand outside. The services consisted of a sermon, the rosary, the litany of the Blessed Virgin, and benediction of the Blessed Sacrament. It was hard work for Don Bosco, but it produced abundant spiritual fruit. Most of the boys who went were notified the day before by Father Alessonati, the prefect. They usually left Turin on Saturday morning, the eve of the feast of Our Lady of the Rosary. Every year their number would increase, and all went on foot. That's right, on foot, by way of Sherry. 2 boys carried stage props, and another was entrusted with the musical scores. Now, remember, not all of the boys were the same age, nor were they all good hikers, and so naturally it would take some boys longer to reach the destination than others, and they would reach Becky at different hours. Only a few arrived in a group, and more than one stragglers came in late at night, especially during the first years of these outings, as some boys would become lost along those country roads and find their way only the following morning after spending the night in some friendly farmhouse. No boy was ever harmed or lost, which is a miracle all by itself. After nearly everyone had arrived, they would assemble at an opportune moment and greet Don Bosco. He would welcome them warmly and enjoy listening to their adventurous stories that were punctuated with much laughter and joy. Supper then followed, during which some boys would invariably fall asleep at the table. Then Don Bosco's brother Joseph would give each boy a sheet for their bed, and under an assistant's supervision, all retired to their sleeping quarters in a large room on the top floor, which had once been used to store wheat. A thick layer of straw on the floor had turned it into a dormitory. Other rooms also had been pressed into service so that all could find a place to sleep. After night prayers, there was absolute silence, thanks to the benefit of fresh air, exercise, and camaraderie. No one stirred again until morning, except for a few of the more devout boys who knelt and prayed silently when they awoke. Finally, on Sunday, the feast of Our Lady of the Rosary, a large crowd would flock from the neighboring villages, especially from Castellinovi. It was truly a popular celebration. Most of the crowd, including the choir boys, had to follow the services from outside the little chapel. In the morning, there was Mass with Holy Communion, preceded and followed by other Masses by priests who had come with Don Bosco. In the first few years, a small reed organ was brought from Turin to accompany the singing. The solemn High Mass was at 10 o'clock. This Mass, usually sung by Father Anthony Cenzano and the pastor of Castelnuovo, who then stayed for dinner. An inverted washtub served as a pulpit, and after benediction, that same washtub became a podium, from which Charles Gattini entertained the crowd with his tomfoolery, until it was time for the stage play, which topped the day. A makeshift stage was usually erected on one side of the yard facing Don Bosco's house. Then, when it got dark, balloons soared into the air and fireworks were set off, while the surrounding hilltops were ablaze with bonfires. Is it any wonder that stories were told of this annual summer outing? That was enough to inspire any truant boy to reform his ways in order to be accounted among those who are worthy of joining the next trip to Becky. Just a little side note about the importance that Don Bosco placed on music. Don Bosco always gave vocal music a place of honor in the festive oratories. Once when he was in Marseille, a priest who belonged to a religious order called on him. The latter had opened a festive oratory and wanted to know if Don Bosco approved of the music as a means of attracting boys. After asking his question, he went on to point out the potentially good effects of music on the boys' character and its usefulness in keeping them away from mischief and affording them relaxation. Don Bosco listened approvingly and finally said, An oratory without music is like a body without a soul. But, the priest added, music also has its drawbacks, and they are not minor ones by any means. He then mentioned his concern that some boys might become worldly minded and sing or play at the theaters, cafes, dance halls, political demonstrations, and the like. Don Bosco listened patiently, without saying a word. Then he finally repeated, "An oratory without music is like a body without a soul." After offering this glimpse into the lives of the boys in the care of St. John Bosco, I can't help but wonder, would boys raised on video games and television in general be as eager to attend Mass as the lads of the oratory? Would parents today be as inclined to allow their sons to trapeze across the countryside unsupervised? Much less condone them sleeping in some friendly farmhouse. Sadly, much has changed over the past 150 plus years, and very little of it for the better when it comes to raising boys to become strong Catholic leaders for the future. But there's still much that can be done to keep our boys busy in positive ways, even in this post-Christian era. With help from St. John Bosco and adopting his spirit of joy and self-sacrifice, let's each of us pray for new ways to foster a young man's sense of adventure and service, within the limits of our current culture, of course. May all of our efforts emulate those of St. Don Bosco, in directing those in our care to turn to Our Lady with love and confidence in all things. Speaking of adopting his spirit of joy and self-sacrifice, it would be a noble act of charity in imitation of Don Bosco to become a monthly promoter. I know it might be challenging, but the joy of charitable giving surpasses the sacrifice. And as a monthly promoter, you'll receive spiritual benefits, including Mass remembrances, daily rosary intentions, and depending on your level of support, you may also receive beautiful religious items and books about Don Bosco's life and teachings, connecting you tangibly to his enduring work. One of my favorites is a set of 2 books, The Sacred History and Roadmap to Heaven. These books are the perfect length for a young boy, while containing enough wisdom for even a bishop to appreciate. Your monthly gift, no matter the amount, makes a real difference in young lives, helping to shape future generations with Don Bosco's values and wisdom. The link to become a donor is in the description box down below, so join us in this vital mission and be a part of Don Bosco's lasting impact on the world. Today, we've explored a powerful story of how Don Bosco kept his boys busy and positively engaged. Through activities like summer outings and forming a brass band, he provided structure and purpose, keeping the boys out of trouble and fostering a strong sense of community. The key lesson from this story is the importance of engaging youth in meaningful activities and providing them with positive role models. Don Bosco's example challenges us to look for ways that we can inspire and guide the youth in our lives. So what did you think about today's episode? What stood out to you the most? Leave a comment in the comment section down below, because I would love to know what your thoughts are, and I try to respond to as many comments as I can. Thank you for watching. May St. John Bosco pray for us, and God bless you, and Mary Immaculate keep you under her mantle. God love you.